Let's start with the poem. The argument of his book. I sing of brooks, of blossoms, birds, and bowers, of April, May, of June, and July flowers. I sing of maypoles, hot carts, wassails, wakes, of bridegrooms, brides, and of their bridal cakes. I write of youth, of love, and have access by these to sing of cleanly wantonness. I sing of dews, of rains, and piece by piece, of balm, of oil, of spice, and ambergris. I sing of times trans-shifting, and I write how roses first came red and lilies white. I write of groves of twilights, and I sing the court of Mab and of the fairy king. I write of hell, I sing and ever shall, of heaven, and hope to have it after all. Friends, that was the inaugural poem of Robert Herrick's book Hesperides. And I've been wanting to talk about it forever. It's like, it's like, ever see that meme, where the guy's sitting there kind of sulking, and no one wants to talk about Robert Herrick. And this is just me. Nobody ever wants to talk about Robert Herrick, but I do, and I'm sitting here on my front porch to do so. I don't know. I hope I'm not washed out in there. It might be just the light in here. So here I'm looking on my farm, looking across the road at this big meadow, 40 acres meadow, which used to be part of this farm, and now it's owned by the great state of Michigan, or as I like to think it, the pretty okay state of Michigan. 100 years ago at this time of year, mid-August, you would probably see sticks of hay or grain out there drying, because this is the time of the harvest, and which is one of the things Robert Herrick celebrates, and we'll talk about that as we get into it. And I can see barn swallows, skimming over the tops of the grass over there, catching insects, and it's kind of a beautiful pastoral setting, and it reminds me of Robert Herrick, because Robert Herrick's career, he was an Anglican priest. His career as a priest was in Devonshire, in the west of England, and in a rural parish. And even though he was more of an urban person, here he was in this urban parish, or rural parish, and he grew to love the affirmation of life that is found in such a setting, not just with farming, but with all the celebrations, not just Christian, but Christian/pagan, or just straight out pagan, or just folk religion. And in his poetry, you see all of this mixed up together, right? You see a Christian sensibility, very much Anglo-Catholic sensibility. He even writes about the rosary upon occasion. But you see this celebration of folk magic and folk religion, like maypoles, for instance. It's a big theme for him. Um, and you see much affirmation of the love between, especially young men and women. A lot of celebration of marriage in his poetry, and it's, in a way, it's the antidote to our own jacked up culture that treats fertility as a disease, and where young people don't get married; they wait till they have careers in their 30 something to get married. And he's, and this is why I love Robert Herrick. He is my pastor. Robert Herrick is my pastor. I am going to his church, because it's a celebration of life as it is. And now he's not like he's completely neglected, because I think he almost always shows up in, like, college English anthology, and you say you're taking British lit. He's usually going to show up in that book, but not an in-depth study. And for me, so for my doctorate, I had to read Herrick. I had to read all kinds of things, but I didn't really. I didn't have, because I was doing my dissertation on other kinds of literature. I didn't really sink into him until I wrote the incarnation of the poetic word, where I have a chapter on him and Nicholas Farrar and the community at Little Gidding, and I called them both kind of Catholic. They're palimpsests of England's Catholic past, because when they wrote this is post quite a bit post Reformation. Yet they were maintaining, and when I say Catholic, I don't mean doctrinal necessarily. I mean culturally. They were maintaining that all the things that the Puritans hated, like Christmas and the maypole and celebration. And one way you can read Herrick is in Hesperides, which he didn't publish till he was almost, I think he's 57, 58 years old. Part of it is when he was kicked out of his living at Devonshire, when the parliamentarians had won in this English at one point in the English Civil Wars, and Oliver Cromwell rose to the Lord Protector. Because in short, to use the vernacular, he hated those assholes, and they hated him. So as soon as they got in there, they threw him out of his living. They did the same thing to, believe it or not, Henry Vaughan's twin brother Thomas Vaughan, the alchemist, who was also an Anglican priest. They kicked them both out of their jobs, right? Because they were not just royalists, and Herrick has quite a few poems to the king, but because they were not Puritans. I mean, absolutely not Puritans. They celebrated the world as it is. And this is what for me, Herrick is both kind of renegade in a funny, playful way. He's really, this whole book is, and it's 500 pages. It's like a big stick put in the eye of the Puritans, because the Puritans, as you know, invented the war on Christmas. And, unless Christmas fell on a Sunday, forget celebrating Christmas. You're not getting 12 days of Christmas. You're getting 0 days of Christmas. They were not fun people. And there are a lot of Christian party poopers to this day who try to suck the fun out of life. But not Robert Herrick. He's not a party pooper, not by any stretch of the imagination. So yeah, I mean, so there's so much going on in his poetry, and when I finally did read all of Hesperides, and much of what was written about it, and actually I should say that appended to Hesperides is another collection of poems called Noble Numbers, which are more ostensibly religious in subject matter. They're not as good as the poems in Hesperides. They're good, but he wouldn't. If that was the only thing he put out, we would not be talking about him today. He would just be super minor poet. But I think he's a major poet who is kind of neglected. But his time has come, because I think it's time for us to re-embrace fertility and fecundity, because we treat those as a disease. And so one place where he does this, and he has quite a few marriage poems in the collection. This one I'll read just part of. It's an epithalamy to Sir Thomas Southwell and his lady. I'll just read the first section. Now's the time, so oft by truth promise should come to crown out your youth. Then, fair ones, do not wrong your joys by staying long, or let love's fire go out by lingering thus in doubt, but learn that time once lost is ne'er redeemed by cost. Then away come Hymen guide to bed the bashful bride. Right? Hymen, the god, the Roman god of marriage, right? And of course, we know there's a little membrane that is placed in the female genitalia called the hymen, which is which doesn't it's not there once a woman has had sex, right? And so that's why it's a god. I mean, and this is what's, I think, so important for our time. So here he's celebrating this, and people getting married young, because that's when you're supposed to get married. 20, not 35. And because what's not only we have a world that's pathologically conditioned about sex and marriage, and which is too bad. And he's kind of an antidote to that. Um, you know, we put off we put off marriage till after sex. That's the way to put it. Yeah. So, which is my dad would say, it's back asswards. Um, and I think there's all kinds of social problems that come with that. I think we're in the middle of it right now. Everything's so pornified, and it's weird. We have pornography in our culture is exploded, whereas marriage and even um, the love, the courtship is almost but gone. I don't even look at my own children. It's wow, it's so different from when I was. They don't really court. They don't date. They don't. What do they do? I don't know what they do. Uh, and so in Herrick's day, it wasn't like that. Of course, you had country fairs and maypole dances and hot carts and all kinds of other things were big social events. And this is when the young people would meet and mix, right? And a similar thing when my childhood. I'm sure it's still around, but when I was a kid, it was like the church fair. It was like the big thing. They're like talk to girls or whatever, right? Oh, or they had dances at school or whatever they had. And I'm certainly there are those things are not absolutely disappeared, but as when a friend of mine recently said, who teaches high school, and he teaches Romeo and Juliet to ninth graders, and he said they don't believe romance is possible or love is possible anymore. So it's kind of weird, right? It's tragic. But as I said, Robert Herrick is the key to this. Is the antidote to this. I don't know if he's the key. Um, I'm going to go to that one a little bit later. He so he celebrates love, and Herrick um, has these imaginary loves. He was a lifelong bachelor, but he has these poems, many to Julia, or to Anthea, or some others I can't remember. I'm going to read one upon Julia's breasts. He even has a poem on Julia's nipples. Can you get away with that today? No. Um, Display thy breasts, my Julia. There let me behold thy circummortal purity. Between whose glories there my lips I'll lay, ravished in that fair Via Lactae. Via Lactae is the way of milk. Just and he says in the argument to his books that I read already, he calls this a cleanly wantonness, right? He has access to a cleanly wantonness. So there's a pure wantonness to it, a kind of paradox, right? But that's how our brother rolls. Oh yeah, here, check it out. Regeneration podcast swag, which if you're on my Patreon at the I think it's the moon level, you can get. And now back to our program. Now it's so like I said, he's all over the place. And when critics looked at his book and they said it's kind of disorganized, right? It's kind of a big mess. Whereas you compare Hesperides to George Herbert's The Temple, which is very organized, right? And it's like structured like a church, in the church, right? And the church militant, right? Church triumphant. But his is all over the place, and the reason it's all over the place is because that's what life is actually like. It's chaotic, and that's what parish life in particular is like. And so not only does he have, pardon me, poems to Julia, marriage poems, poems that celebrate the maypole and the hot cart and the other festivals. He also has poems to the Lars or the Lares, which, if you know your Virgil, that's what Aeneas takes with him from uh, the sack of Troy, his household gods, right? And there's a great the film, what do you call it, Gladiator with Russell Crowe, directed by what's that guy's name? It'll come to me. Um, Ridley Scott. There's a couple wonderful scenes with Crowe's character Maximus praying to his household gods, to his ancestors, right? And it's really tender, very beautiful, and very, very religious in a sincere way. Um, so he's got poems to them as well. So he's kind of got it all thrown into this chaotic mixed bag of belief. And what is belief? I mean, we could think about what do you really believe? I mean, there are people who can be very doctrinal and about their Christianity of whatever stripe, but if you scratch them, you realize their belief system is a little bit more chaotic than even they would be willing to admit. And what's cool about Robert Herrick is he admits it. He admits it, right? This is how it is. Get over it, right? This is how human life is. So the Lares, right? So I don't know about you, but I often talk to my deceased relatives. And I don't know if you call it prayer, but I talk to them, right? Or deceased friends, you know. And that's not a sign of mental illness. That's actually a sign of health. We should do that. In fact, Rudolf Steiner recommended reading to the dead. Because I'm sure they appreciate it. Just moving along in the book, and now it's 500 poems. 500 poems in this book. I will not read them all, but I'll throw out a couple that give you an idea of who he is, and some of them I'll read the entire poem, but for the longer ones, I'll just read a section. Pardon me. Here's the hot cart, or harvest home, to the right honourable Mildmay, Earl of Westmoreland. Come, sons of summer, by whose toil we are the lords of wine and oil, by whose tough labours and rough hands we rip up first and then reap our lands. Crowned with the ears of corn, now come, and to the pipe sing harvest home. Come forth, my lord, and see the cart, dressed up with all the country art. Pardon me, something making me a little allergic today. So the hot cart, the harvest cart, which they would celebrate. In fact, part of that celebration, I think in Devon, but maybe not, but it's certainly in different parts of England and Ireland at the time, was the corn dolly, right? Where you would make a doll or a mannequin, a mawkin, from the last sheaf of corn that was out in the field as a kind of tutelary spirit for the next year's harvest. So, and we have a couple corn dolls in our house. I should have brought one out. And my wife made. And at this time of the year, this is when you would see that you're in corn, of course. When the Brits talked about corn, they were not talking about maize. They were talking about wheat and rye and things like this. Which not here, but right around the corner, maybe 2 weeks ago, they cut down they were growing rye. They harvested their rye, and last week they raked up the straw. And in fact, yesterday, was it yesterday? Yeah, yesterday I was in a community not far away from here where a lot of Amish live, and they still maintain a lot of those we would call them antique practices of farming. And they had sticks of wheat out in the field drying. It was really kind of a cool thing. You rarely see that. Old fashioned, it's nice to see. Other than what you usually see is round bales in fields drying, or just rolled up. I should not drying. Pardon me. Which is not as cool as seeing those sticks, and at least the Amish still maintain that. So when when everything collapses, we know who to learn from. So let's look at another poem here. Um, so another thing he does is Herrick will write epigrams kind of in the style of Martial, the Roman poet. And they're often super funny, and they often rip on people. And here's one where he's ripping on people, and this is very Martial in overtones. It's called Upon Bridget. Of 4 teeth only Bridget was possessed. 2 she spat out, a cough forced out the rest. Oh God! When I read that this morning at the kitchen table, I laughed out loud. My wife thought I had been drinking, but I hadn't. So he does that. I mean, this is part of parish life, right? It's people drive you nuts, or things are just funny. Um, but also another thing he celebrates, which uh, might have some currency now, and you see people actually starting to believe in fairies more often nowadays, because look what else we have. Um, he talks about the court of the fairy king of Oberon and Queen Mab, right? And you see this Shakespeare, who was from the countryside, a little bit earlier than Herrick, not much, and it still celebrates that in Midsummer Night's Dream in particular, but it also comes up in The Merry Wives of Windsor, which is a very funny play. And here's a little bit from Oberon's Palace, which is kind of a long poem. After the feast, my Shepcot see, the fairy court I give to thee, where we'll present our Oberon led, half tipsy, to the fairy bed, where Mab he finds, who there doth lie, not without mickle majesty, which done and thence removed the light, will wish them both and thee good night. Full as a bee with thyme and red as cherry harvest, now high fed for lust and action, on he'll go to lie with Mab, though all say no. Lust has no ears, he's sharp as thorn, and fretful carries hay in his horn. And lightning in his eyes, and flings among the elves, if move the stings of peltish wasps. Well known his guard, kings though they're baited will be feared. And of course, the kings well baited will be feared is an allusion to Charles, right, who had been deposed by and killed eventually by the parliamentarians, uh, Herrick's mortal enemies. Um, let's take another look. Pardon me, at the maypole, and that's when I read the whole thing. Now, I had planned on reading this at the maypole, which is over there, like North Pasture, because I decided this year when I made the maypole for our annual maypole dance, our May Day festival, I decided to leave it up rather than cut down a new tree every year. And of course, my goat has tilted a little bit by knocking against it, so I'll have to straighten it up eventually. But here, but on the other hand, it would have been a drag to run an extension cord or even use my phone way out there in the pasture. Plus, the grass is super wet this morning with dew. But here it is anyway. The maypole. The maypole is up. Now give me the cup. I'll drink to the garlands around it. But first into those whose hands did compose the glory of flowers that crowned it. A health to my girls, whose husbands may earls or lords be granting my wishes. And when they ye wed to the bridal bed, then multiply all like to fishes. Multiply, right? Be fruitful and multiply, right? So that's about as Christian a notion as you can get, and which is why we live in an anti-Christian world that doesn't want you to procreate, right? The population's out of control. No, it's not. And Herrick, it's like he's my patron saint. I swear to God. And he is my pastor. I want to go drink ale or mead with Father Herrick. I mean, if I had to go, when I think about going back to meet somebody in history, and I know a lot of poets and Shakespeare and stuff. He would like John Donne. I love John Donne. I don't know if I could hang out with him. He might be too uptight. But Robert Herrick, I could hang out with him for sure. Another thing he does, and I won't read the whole thing. He well, he's got poems celebrating Candlemas and Twelfth Night, and why? And Christmas, of course. Why? Well, because the Puritans hated those things. Oh man, it's bright in here. So if I look at, I don't know, I'm looking like a ghost right there, and I don't know if I am or not. But here's Twelfth Night, or King or Queen. Let's read the whole thing. Now the mirth comes with the cake full of plums, where beans the king of the sport here. Beside we must know the pea also must revel as queen in the court here. Now it's referring to the tradition of the bean cake. You know, we have a bean cake. We do 12th night at our farm. It's one of my favorite days of the year. Where you hear that morning dove? Where the idea is you take a cake and before as you're preparing it, you put a uncooked bean inside of it, and then when we're eating the cake, whoever gets the bean becomes king for the evening or queen, and that's what he's alluding to. And these are the things that the Puritans outlawed when they came into power, and you know they're big gigantic party poopers, and Herrick hates them, and so do I. and my dog's outside wanting to come out. Come on, Pharaoh. She won't come. She's staring at me through the door. It's creepy. Here, let me let her out. She was whining at the door. It would distract me for the rest of the day. Anyway, so yeah, so they hated Candlemas. They hated Twelfth Night. They outlawed the 12 days of Christmas, and Herrick is fighting back with the only weapons he has, which is poetry. And he has beautiful poems for Candlemas as well. But so here, what's the take home here? The take home is a very traditional take home. I'll read this poem right here, which is probably, if you ever encountered Herrick in a English course in college, it may have been this one. To the virgins to make much of time. Gather ye rosebuds while ye may, old time is still a-flying, and this same flower that smiles today, tomorrow will be dying. The glorious lamp of heaven, the sun, the higher he's a-getting, the sooner will his race be run, and nearer he's to setting. That age is best which is the first, when youth and blood are warmer, but being spent the worse and worse times, still succeed the former. Then be not coy, but use your time, and while ye may, go marry. For having lost but once your prime, you may forever tarry. Yeah. So this is this is the reason this is often used. I'm gonna move over here. The reason this poem's often used in courses is because it's an example of the Carpe diem. Right? Can't see how this is looking here. It might be weird. But it's Carpe diem, seize the day. Seize the day. You got to make the most of the time, right? And this is what's kind of tragic in our own culture is that we have young people don't marry. Well, they don't marry typically. I mean, very rare do young people, like 20-year-olds, marry. They wait till they're 33 or something, or later, and then they don't have children. For a long time. I saw a story this morning come across the feed that birth rates in England and Wales have plummeted, right? People don't have kids. And it's not, I mean, why? Probably through propaganda or other things, people have convinced us to stop procreating, or at least slow down, because we have to save the planet. But I think that embrace, well, it's not an embrace of life. What is an embrace of, right? It's an embrace of sterility, and I could go into other things here that are political. I think I will refrain. And I won't read the whole poem because it's long, but it's a one of, he's always a good poet. He's solid with versification. But Karina's gone to Maine, and Karina's going to Maine. Sorry. Get up for shame. The booming morn upon her wings presents the god unshorn. See how Aurora throws her fair, fresh quilted colors through the air. Get up, sweet slug-a-bed, and see the dew bespangling herb and tree. Each flower has wept and bowed toward the east, above an hour since. Yet you not dressed, nay, not so much as out of bed. When all the birds have met and said, and sung their thankful hymns, 'tis sin, nay, profanation, to keep in. When 1,000 virgins on this day spring sooner than the lark to fetch the May. Isn't that a beautiful line? When 1,000 virgins on this day spring sooner than the lark to fetch in May. And what they would do, maidens would go out, and the young men would go get the pole. Thank you, Freud. And the young women would go get the flowers to deck the May. I mean, just why can't we do this? You know what I mean? Why can't we celebrate this? It's a beautiful thing to celebrate. And there's also a tradition. I don't know if I can't remember if Herrick mentions it or not, where on May Day, maidens would wash their face in the dew from the grass as a way to preserve their beauty, as a charm, right? Beautiful. And let me just read another stanza from here. Rise and put on your foliage and be seen to come forth like the springtime, fresh and green, and sweet as Flora. Take no care for jewels for your gown or hair, fear not. The leaves will strew gems in abundance upon you. Besides, the childhood of the day has kept against you come some orient pearls unwept. Come and receive them while the light hangs on the dewlocks of the night. And Titan on the eastern hill retires himself, or else stands still till you come forth. Wash, dress, be brief in praying. Few beads are best when once we go a-maying. Wow, how's that for a priest? Few beads are best when once we go a-maying, right? Because I don't know. I mean, the Puritans were so austere, so you know this, the story of Weber and the rise of capitalism of the Puritan Reformation. You're right. We're just making money here, which is one of the things actually Ben Jonson makes fun of the Puritans too, as money grubbing bastards disguised in cloaks of piety. Yeah, that's our world, isn't it? So anyway, I think we'll probably end with one more. I'll skip ahead, even though the whole thing is so good. I'll just read the rest. Come, my Karina, come, and coming mark how each field turns a street, each street a park made green and trim with trees. See how devotion gives each house a bough or branch, each porch, each door, ere this an ark or a tabernacle is, made up of white thorn neatly interwove, as if here were those cooler shades of love. Can such delights be in the street, in open fields, and we not see it? Come, well abroad, and let's obey the proclamation made for May, and sin no more as we have done by staying. But my Karina, come, let's go a-maying. There's not a budding boy or girl this day but is got up and gone to bring in May. A deal of youth ere this is come, back when the whitethorn laden home. Some have dispatched their cakes and cream before that we have left to dream. And some have wept and wooed and plighted troth, and chose their priest ere we can cast off sloth. They would do hand fasting, kind of a trial marriage, right? Many a green gown has been given, many a kiss, both odd and even, many a glance too has been sent from out the eye love's firmament. Many a jest told of the keys betraying this night, and locks picked, yet we're not amain. Come, let us go while we are in our prime, and take the harmless folly of the time. We shall grow old apace and die before we know our liberty. Our life is short, and our days run as fast away as do the sun's. And as a vapor or a drop of rain once lost, ne'er can be found again. So when or you or I are made a fable song or fleeting shade, all love, all liking, all delight lies drowned with us in endless night. Then while time serves and we are but decaying, come, my Karina, come, let's go amain. So let's embrace life, which is the most Christian thing you can do. All right, and I'll talk to you next time. Take care, and I'd love to hear your comments or subscribe and do all the things you like to do. And I'll catch you next time.